Street vendor gives free meals to struggling artists unaware. They're painting his portrait for museums. The phrase echoed in Marco's mind as he stood beneath the faded awning of his food cart, watching raindrops dance across the pavement like scattered dreams. He hadn't always been a street vendor. Once he had been something else, someone else, before life had folded in on itself like wet cardboard in a storm. The morning air carried the chill of early autumn, seeping through his worn jacket and settling into his bones. 58 years had etched themselves into the creases around Marco's eyes, each line a chapter of a story few bothered to read anymore. His hands, rough and calloused from decades of work, moved with practiced precision as he prepared his cart for the day ahead. Steam rose from the pot of soup he stirred, carrying with it the aroma of rosemary and thyme. His mother's recipe, one of the few treasures he had managed to hold on to. In this corner of the city, where art galleries stood like gleaming sentinels amid crumbling tenements, Marco had carved out a modest existence. His small food cart with its hand-painted sign, Marco's Homemade, had become a fixture on this street, as familiar as the cracks in the sidewalk or the persistent pigeon that had made its home in the awning above the nearby bus stop. As he worked, Marco's eyes drifted to the park across the street, where a cluster of young artists had gathered, as they did most mornings. Their easels formed a semicircle, canvas faces turned toward the city like sunflowers seeking light. He recognized a few of them. The girl with the blue-streaked hair who always ordered the vegetable soup, the lanky young man with glasses who seemed to survive on coffee and little else, the older woman who sketched with charcoal-stained fingers and rarely spoke. Struggling artists, all of them. Marco knew hunger when he saw it, not just the physical kind that gnawed at empty stomachs, but the deeper hunger that lived in the eyes. The hunger for recognition, for someone to see value in what you created. He understood that hunger all too well. The first customer of the day approached. Not an artist, but a businessman in a hurry, phone pressed to his ear. Marco served him quickly, the exchange of food and money so routine it required no thought. As the man walked away without a word of thanks, Marco's gaze returned to the park, to the artists with their empty stomachs and full hearts. A decision formed in his mind, simple and clear as the steam rising from his pots. He would do what he could with what little he had. It wasn't much, a gesture, nothing more. But sometimes a gesture was enough to keep hope alive for one more day. Across the street, Eliza Thompson wiped a smudge of blue paint from her cheek, leaving another in its place. 26 years old with student loan debt that felt like a mountain and an art degree that the world seemed determined to render worthless, she had reached the point where pride had become a luxury she could no longer afford. Her stomach growled, a persistent reminder that her last meal had been yesterday's lunch. Half a sandwich shared with her roommate, another struggling artist who had recently resorted to painting corporate murals to make rent. "You should eat something," said Daniel, the lanky young man with glasses who occupied the easel next to hers. He pushed his frames higher on his nose, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. "You can't create if you're running on empty." Eliza attempted a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I'm fine. I'll grab something later." The lie felt bitter on her tongue. There would be no later until the check from her part-time gallery assistant job arrived tomorrow. Daniel didn't push, returning to his own canvas. A cityscape rendered in muted blues and grays that somehow captured the essence of urban loneliness in a way that made Eliza's chest ache. He was talented, more talented than he knew. They all were in their own ways. Talent, she had discovered, was rarely the problem. It was the world's willingness to value that talent that often fell short. The scent reached her before she saw its source. Warm, rich, carrying notes of herbs and spices that made her stomach clench painfully. Looking up, Eliza found the street vendor from across the road standing before their small gathering, a tray balanced in his weathered hands. Good morning," he said, his accent wrapping around the words like a gentle embrace. Italian, perhaps, or Spanish, softened by decades in America. "I thought you might be hungry. Artists must eat to create beautiful things, yes." He set the tray down on a nearby bench. Small cups of steaming soup, chunks of bread still warm from whatever oven he had access to, paper cups of coffee that smelled rich and inviting. Not fancy food, but real food, made with care. The artists exchanged glances, a current of both gratitude and shame passing between them. Pride warred with hunger, and hunger won. "Please," the man said, gesturing to the food. "I am Marco. I see you here every day making beauty. This city needs beauty." A simple statement, delivered without grandeur, yet it touched something deep within Eliza's chest. "We can't pay," she said, the words sticking in her throat. Not today. Marco's smile deepened the creases around his eyes. Did I ask for payment? This is a gift. In Italy, where I come from, we understand that artists keep the soul of a place alive. He shrugged, a gesture so expressive it seemed to encompass entire philosophies. Eat, create. That is payment enough. He left them then, returning to his cart across the street, unaware of the silence that fell in his wake. A silence filled with the kind of gratitude that changes something fundamental in those who experience it. Daniel was the first to move, taking a cup of soup and a piece of bread. Thank you. He called after Marco, who raised a hand in acknowledgement without turning around. As the food was shared among them, Eliza found herself studying Marco from a distance. The way he moved, the gentle dignity in his posture, despite the simplicity of his circumstances, the kindness in his face that spoke of someone who had known hardship but refused to be hardened by it. She reached for her sketchbook, not her main canvas, but the small, leather-bound book where she captured moments, impressions, the seeds of larger works. Almost without conscious thought, her pencil began to trace the outline of Marco's profile against the backdrop of his modest cart. He has a good face, observed Gloria, the older woman with charcoal-stained fingers, who had materialized beside Eliza without a sound. Strong bones, character. Eliza nodded, continuing to sketch. He does. It's like his face tells a story. Gloria hummed in agreement, sipping her soup with the reverence of someone who understood hunger as an old companion. Perhaps that's a story worth telling. The idea took root then, small but persistent, like a seedling pushing through concrete. Eliza glanced at Daniel, who was already looking at her, a similar thought clearly forming behind his thoughtful eyes. Are you thinking what I'm thinking? She asked. Daniel's smile was slow but genuine. That depends. Are you thinking that we finally found our subject for the community exhibition? Eliza looked back at Marco, who was now serving a young mother and her child, adding an extra roll to their order with a conspiratorial wink to the little girl. I'm thinking bigger than that, she said softly. And so it began, with a cup of soup and a sketch in a leather-bound book. The project that would change everything, though none of them knew it yet. Days passed, then weeks, each morning beginning the same way. Marco would arrive before dawn to prepare his food, and the artists would set up their easels in the park. And each day, without fail, Marco would cross the street with his tray of offerings. Soup on cold days, cool tea and sandwiches when the weather turned warm, always something nourishing, always given freely. What changed was what happened after. While they still worked on their individual projects, each artist had begun a second piece, a portrait of Marco. Not just his physical likeness, though that was part of it, but an attempt to capture the essence of the man who had become their unexpected benefactor. Eliza painted Marco as he stood beneath his awning, light falling across his face in a way that illuminated the gentle strength there. Daniel created a series of charcoal sketches that focused on Marco's hands, preparing food, serving customers, gesturing as he told stories from his homeland. Gloria, with her years of experience, worked on an oil painting that somehow captured both Marco's present dignity and hints of his past sorrows. Others joined them, a sculptor who began creating a small bronze of Marco, a photographer who documented the daily ritual of giving, a textile artist who incorporated the colors of Marco's cart into a tapestry that told the story of community and kindness. None of them told Marco what they were doing. Some strange, shared instinct kept them silent on the matter, as though speaking of it might break the spell that had been cast over their small corner of the city. Marco noticed the change in their work habits, of course, the way they would study him when they thought he wasn't looking, the sketchbooks that closed hastily when he approached, the conversations that paused and shifted when he drew near. But he asked no questions. In his experience, artists were creatures of mystery and inspiration, following muses only they could see or hear. If his presence somehow served their creative purposes, he was content to let them work. What he didn't notice was how his daily acts of kindness were changing him as well. The stoop in his shoulders had lessened. He smiled more easily, laughed more often. The weight of loneliness that had been his constant companion for so many years seemed lighter somehow, more bearable. On a crisp October morning, as golden light spilled over the cityscape and leaves drifted like copper coins on the breeze, Eliza arrived at the park earlier than usual. She found Marco already at his cart, arranging cups and plates with careful precision. Good morning, she called, approaching with her hands tucked into the pockets of her oversized jacket. A thrift store find that was more about function than fashion. Marco looked up, surprise and pleasure warming his features. Ah, the early bird, Good morning, Eliza. You are the first today. I wanted to ask you something, she said, suddenly nervous, though she couldn't have explained why. The others and we were wondering if you might join us for dinner tonight. Nothing fancy, just at Gloria's apartment. She's making pasta. The invitation hung in the air between them, simple yet somehow momentous. Marco's hands stilled on the counter, and something flickered across his face. Surprise, certainly, but also a flash of something deeper, more vulnerable. Dinner? He repeated as though the concept required translation. Eliza nodded, shifting her weight from one foot to the other. You've fed us for months now. We thought, well, it's our turn. Marco was silent for a long moment, and Eliza feared she had somehow overstepped, crossed some invisible boundary. Then his face softened into a smile that reached all the way to his eyes, crinkling the corners and lighting something within. I would be honored, he said simply. That evening, Marco closed his cart early for the first time in years. He returned to his small apartment, a spare, clean space with few decorations save for a single photograph of a woman with his eyes and a painting of an Italian coastal town he hadn't seen in decades. He showered, trimmed his beard with unusual care, and put on his good shirt, dark blue save for special occasions that rarely came. As he walked to Gloria's apartment, a bottle of modest wine in hand, Marco felt an unfamiliar flutter in his chest. Nervousness, yes, but also a kind of quiet joy he had almost forgotten existed. Gloria's apartment was on the third floor of a pre-war building, the hallways worn but clean, carrying the sense of a dozen different cuisines from around the world. Music drifted from behind her door, something classical that Marco couldn't name, but that stirred memories of Sunday afternoons in his mother's kitchen. Daniel opened the door before Marco could knock, as though they had been watching for his arrival. Marco, come in, everyone's here. And they were, all the artists from the park, crowded into Gloria's modest living room, which had been transformed by candlelight in the tantalizing aroma of garlic and tomatoes. They greeted him with warmth that went beyond politeness, with genuine affection that made his chest tighten with emotion he struggled to contain. The evening unfolded like a flower opening to the sun. They ate Gloria's pasta, simple but perfect, the sauce rich with flavors that reminded Marco of home. They drank wine from mismatched glasses and told stories, the artists of their dreams and struggles, Marco of his childhood in Italy, his journey to America, the restaurant he had once owned before a fire had taken everything but his will to begin again. I had insurance, he explained, twirling pasta on his fork with the practiced ease of someone who had grown up doing so. But not enough. And there were complications. In the end, I took what remained and bought my cart. A new beginning, smaller but my own. Do you miss it? Eliza asked. The restaurant? Marco considered the question, his eyes drifting to the window where city lights glimmered like earthbound stars. Sometimes, he admitted. Not the business itself, but the community it created. People coming together, sharing food, becoming, for a little while, a family. He smiled, looking around at the faces watching him with genuine interest. But perhaps family can be found in unexpected places, yes. The conversation flowed like wine after that, easier and warmer. Marco found himself laughing in a way he hadn't in years. The sound rusty at first, then freer, younger. These young artists with their dreams and struggles, they reminded him of himself at their age, full of passion and hope, determined to create something meaningful in a world that often seemed indifferent to beauty. It was late when Eliza disappeared into Gloria's spare room, returning with something covered in a cloth. The room quieted, an anticipatory hush falling over the gathering. Marco, she said, her voice steady despite the nervous flutter of her hands. We have something for you. She placed the covered object on the coffee table before him. Marco looked at the expectant faces surrounding him, confusion giving way to curiosity. Go ahead, Daniel encouraged. It's yours. With careful hands, Marco pulled away the cloth to reveal a leather-bound portfolio. Opening it, he found himself looking at sketches, dozens of them, all of him. Marco at his cart, Marco serving food, Marco laughing, Marco lost in thought. His own face looked back at him from every page, rendered in pencil, charcoal, watercolor, each capturing something different yet essentially true. Words failed him as he turned the pages slowly, something tightening in his throat. These young artists, whom he had thought needed only food, had seen him, truly seen him, in a way no one had in years. This is just the beginning, Gloria said gently. We've been working on something larger, a project, a tribute, Daniel added, to kindness. To you. Marco looked up, eyes bright with unshed tears. "I don't understand." Eliza knelt beside him, her own eyes suspiciously damp. "There's an exhibition next month at the Westside Gallery. It's called Invisible Cities, about the people and moments that make up the soul of urban life, but often go unnoticed. We've been commissioned to contribute." She gestured to the portfolio. "This is our subject. You, Marco. Your daily act of generosity, your humanity." Marco's hand trembled as he touched one of the sketches. A simple rendering of him offering a bowl of soup to an unseen recipient, his face alight with quiet joy in the giving. "But I am just a food vendor," he whispered. "No," Gloria said firmly. "You are the reminder this city needs. That kindness still exists, that beauty can be found in simple acts of humanity. You feed more than our bodies, Marco. You feed our hope." The tears came then, silent and cleansing, rolling down Marco's weathered cheeks. He made no move to wipe them away, allowing himself this moment of being truly seen, truly known, after so many years of invisibility. That night marked a turning point, though none of them recognized it as such at the time. The exhibition was still weeks away, a future possibility rather than a present reality. What mattered was the connection that had been forged, the family of choice that had formed around a street cart and cups of soup. The artists continued their work with renewed purpose, now openly sketching and painting Marco as he went about his daily routine. He became accustomed to their scrutiny, even began to enjoy it, posing dramatically when he caught them watching, making them laugh with exaggerated expressions. For his part, Marco expanded his generosity. He learned their preferences, Daniel's weakness for anything with cinnamon, Eliza's love of his spicy tomato soup, Gloria's appreciation for his authentic Italian bread. He adjusted his menu accordingly, taking quiet pleasure in the way their faces lit up when he arrived with their favorites. The day of the exhibition arrived on the wings of the first snow of the season, delicate flakes that dissolved on contact with the ground, but transformed the air into a swirling canvas of white. Marco closed his cart early, following Eliza's instructions to dress nicely, but not to worry too much about it. "Just be yourself," she had said, squeezing his hand. "That's who we've been painting all these months." The Westside Gallery was housed in a converted warehouse, all exposed brick and soaring ceilings, with lighting designed to make the ordinary seem magical. Marco arrived alone, his heart pounding so hard he feared it might be audible to those around him. He had been to galleries before, of course, but always as an anonymous visitor, never as whatever he was tonight. The exhibition space was already crowded when he entered. Artists, critics, collectors, and ordinary people drawn by curiosity or a love of art. Marco moved through them uncertainly, searching for a familiar face among the sea of strangers. "Marco, over here!" Daniel's voice cut through the murmur of conversation, a lifeline in unfamiliar waters. Marco turned to find him standing with Eliza and Gloria near the entrance to one of the exhibition rooms, all three dressed more formally than he had ever seen them, yet still unmistakably themselves. "You came," Eliza said, taking his arm with familiar ease. "I was afraid you might change your mind." "I gave my word," Marco replied simply, "though I must confess I am nervous." Gloria patted his other arm. "Don't be. Just remember you're among friends." Together they led him into the exhibition room, and Marco stopped short, his breath catching in his throat. The space was dedicated entirely to works featuring him. Not just the small studies he had seen in the portfolio, but full-sized paintings, sculptures, multimedia pieces, each capturing some aspect of his daily life and work. There he was, rendered in oils, standing beneath his cart's awning, with morning light illuminating his face. There were his hands sculpted in bronze, offering a bowl with a gesture of dignity and care. There was his cart, recreated in a detailed diorama that showed the entire street corner, complete with tiny figures of the artists in the park. But most striking was the centerpiece, a large canvas that dominated the far wall. In it, Marco stood at his cart, surrounded by a golden aura of light that seemed to emanate from within him, rather than from any external source. Around him, the city unfolded in concentric circles, first the artist receiving his food, then wider ripples showing how that simple act of kindness spread outward. The artists creating with renewed energy, sharing their work, touching others with their creations. The message was unmistakable. One act of generosity creating endless ripples of beauty and connection. Beneath it, a simple plaque read, "The Everyday Saint, Portrait of Marco Rossi." People were looking at him now, recognition dawning on their faces as they glanced between the art and the man who had inspired it. Someone began to applaud, and then another, and suddenly the room filled with the sound of appreciation, not just for the art, but for him, for what he represented. "I don't understand," Marco whispered, overwhelmed. "Why me? I did nothing extraordinary." A woman in an elegant black dress approached, her handshake firm, her smile genuine. "Mr. Rossi, I'm Catherine Wells, the gallery director. What these artists have captured is precisely the extraordinary nature of what seems ordinary. Your daily act of kindness, multiplied over months, years. This is the essence of humanity at its best." She gestured to the gathered crowd. And people respond to that. They hunger for reminders that goodness exists in small, sustainable acts. As if to prove her point, a man in an expensive suit stepped forward, introducing himself as a curator from the city's main art museum. "We'd like to discuss acquiring several pieces from this collection for our permanent exhibition on urban life," he explained. "With your permission, of course, Mr. Rossi," as the subject. The evening blurred after that. Introductions, conversations, expressions of admiration that left Marco feeling both exposed and strangely validated. Critics praised the technical skill and emotional resonance of the works. Collectors inquired about purchases. A local news crew arrived to film a segment about the exhibition. Through it all, Marco watched with wonder as the artists, his artists, as he had come to think of them, received the recognition they so richly deserved. Eliza spoke eloquently about the project's inception. Daniel discussed his techniques with established artists who treated him as a peer. Gloria accepted compliments with the quiet grace of someone who had waited a lifetime for acknowledgement. They were being seen, truly seen, for their talent and vision. And it had happened because they had first seen him. Not just a street vendor, but a human being worthy of attention and artistic interpretation. Late in the evening, as the crowd began to thin, Marco found himself standing alone before the centerpiece painting, lost in contemplation of this mirror image that reflected back something he had not recognized in himself. "What do you think?" Eliza asked softly, appearing at his side. "Do you see what we see?" Marco studied the painting, the light emanating from his painted self, the ripples of influence spreading outward. "I see a simple man doing a simple thing," he said finally. "But perhaps," he paused, searching for words, "perhaps simple things are not so simple after all." Eliza slipped her hand into his, a gesture that had become natural between them. "The museum wants to create a special exhibition," she said, "not just about you, but about everyday acts of extraordinary kindness throughout the city." "You've started something, Marco." He shook his head, humbled. "No, we started something. Together." As they stood there, hand in hand before the painting that had captured not just a man, but a philosophy of living, Marco felt something shift within him. A healing of an old wound he had carried so long, he had forgotten it was there. For years after losing his restaurant, he had felt diminished, reduced, as though his worth had burned away with his livelihood. But these young artists, with their keen eyes and open hearts, had seen value in him beyond what he could provide or produce. They had seen his humanity, his essence, and reflected it back to him in strokes of color and form. In that reflection, Marco found himself again. Not the restaurant owner he had been, nor merely the street vendor he had become, but something more complete, a man capable of creating ripples of kindness that extended far beyond his small corner of the city. The exhibition marked not an ending, but a beginning. Sales from the artwork provided the artist with financial breathing room they had never experienced. Enough for Eliza to rent a proper studio, for Daniel to quit his exhausting night job and focus on his art, for Gloria to purchase the high-quality materials she had long denied herself. For Marco, the changes were both subtle and profound. His food cart remained where it had always been, but it was no longer just a cart. It had become a gathering place, a symbol, a destination. People came from across the city to meet the man from the exhibition, to experience for themselves the kindness that had inspired so much art. Some days when the weather was fine, the artists still set up their easels in the park across from his cart. But now they were joined by others, students, amateurs, established artists drawn by the story that had spread through the city's creative community. Marco still brought them food, but now they insisted on paying, or on exchanging artwork for meals, creating an informal economy of generosity that enriched everyone involved. The museum exhibition opened 6 months later, a major installation titled The Ripple Effect: How Small Acts of Kindness Shape a City. Marco's story was the centerpiece, but it had expanded to include other everyday heroes. a bus driver who knew all his regular passengers by name, a librarian who created a safe haven for neighborhood children, a retired teacher who offered free tutoring from her front porch. On opening night, Marco stood in the grand marble hall of the museum, surrounded by the artists who had become his family, watching as hundreds of visitors moved through the exhibition, pausing to read stories of kindness, to appreciate the art those stories had inspired, to reflect on their own capacity for creating ripples of positive change. Eliza, resplendent in a blue dress that matched her newly confident demeanor, slipped her arm through his. How does it feel?" she asked, and to be amused? Marco chuckled, the sound warm and genuine. "Strange. Wonderful. Humbling." He looked around at the gathered crowd, at the art that had come from such an unlikely beginning. "I always believed art was important, that beauty matters in a difficult world, but I never imagined I would be part of creating it." "You've always been creating it," Gloria said, joining them with Daniel at her side. "Every bowl of soup, every kind word, every moment you chose generosity when the world had given you reasons for bitterness, that was art of the highest form." Later that evening, as they walked together through the snowy streets toward the small Italian restaurant where they had reserved a table to celebrate, Marco found himself thinking of his mother, how she had taught him that food was love made visible, that nurturing others was a sacred act. She would have understood this journey, this transformation through connection. The restaurant was warm and inviting, candles flickering on red-checked tablecloths, the scent of garlic and basil in the air. As they settled around the table, Marco, Eliza, Daniel, Gloria, and the other artists who had become part of their circle, a sense of completion washed over him. The wheel had turned full circle. He had lost a restaurant but gained a family. He had given what little he had and received abundance in return. When the waiter brought bread to the table, Marco reached for it automatically, breaking it into pieces and passing it around before serving himself. A habit of caregiving so ingrained he no longer noticed it. But the others did, exchanging glances of understanding. Eliza raised her glass, her eyes bright in the candlelight. To Marco, she said, "Who taught us that the most valuable currency is kindness, and that art is born from seeing, truly seeing, one another." The glasses clinked together, a crystalline sound of celebration and connection. Outside, snow continued to fall, transforming the city into a canvas of white possibility, while inside, warmth and laughter created a haven against the cold, a small, perfect universe of belonging. Marco looked around at these faces that had become so dear to him, at these artists who had found their voices partly through him, and felt a contentment so profound it bordered on joy. He had begun by feeding their bodies, never imagining they would nourish his soul in return. Street vendor gives free meals to struggling artists unaware. They're painting his portrait for museums. The title that had once been just words had become a story. His story, their story, a testament to the transformative power of simple human connection. In the end, that was the masterpiece. Not the paintings hanging in galleries or the sculptures displayed in museums, but the web of care and recognition they had woven together, creating beauty from ordinary moments, finding extraordinary value in everyday kindness. And that perhaps was art in its truest form.